anytime we're talking engaged, bracing, getting set, anything along those lines, that's what we are talking about, okay? Is understanding how to properly brace and engage and let that trickle out from there. And that's what we call core to extremity, okay? The next thing we're gonna do, all right? Go ahead and spread yourself out a little bit, ladies. From here, okay, now squatting, you guys, is going to be independent, okay? Now, I know there's a lot of, there's a million recommendations as far as how you should hold your feet. Should be standing here, should you be doing this. The way we like to start everyone is basically, so Courtney's going to take her heels and cut her butt cheeks in half, okay? So basically, this is what we call hip width apart. From there, she's going to take another step outside of that. Good, okay, so she's going to be basically outside her shoulder, outside shoulders from that position, okay? Now the next thing we often get is like, well, should my toes be straight ahead? Should be straight out? Should be in an angle? I saw this crazy Instagram thing where if I change my toe angle, I'm able to hit this glute here and this here and all. What we're looking for, you guys, is what we focus on is functional movement, okay? Yes, there are different aspects of what we do to engage different musculature and everything else, but more than anything, what we look for is to be able to put things at an ideal position for each individual person, so that way we're engaging properly and we're maintaining good, proper motor pattern through each of those, through each of the joints, okay? So
we lost a man.
Typically, what we look for is those feet. We're going to take them straight forward, and then we're going to pitch them out about 10 to 7 degrees, okay? From there, so toes are going to be slightly turned out. From this position, all I'm going to ask Courtney to do is simply sit down. There, I put it. Now, I put the ball under here. For some of you guys who are just getting comfortable with sitting down, you might start with a chair. You might start with something else. All I'm going to simply do is just ask Courtney to sit down and stand up. All right, so if you can just sit down to your apparatus and stand on up. Good. Good. Let's go one more time. Give me something like you don't know you're squatting. Okay. All right, so I asked her to do something like she hasn't been squatting for 20 years of her life. All right. To see issues with mobility, it's oftentimes an issue of stability at the okay, now the first thing that's touching the ground for Courtney is her feet, okay? We can work on all of these things, right? Like you might have noticed her knees caved in, her low back was rounding, her chest was falling, everything else. But oftentimes, you guys, from my experience, the feet is probably one of the more neglected aspects of our movement, okay? So what I'm gonna do for that point is I'm gonna see if we can set our foundation, okay? Now, what I like to visualize the foot as, think of it like a tripod, okay? There's basically 3 legs fall over, right? You're gonna say goodbye to that. There's not gonna be any stability, and especially, yet again, if there's no stability, there's not gonna be any mobility, okay? So we need to make sure we solidify and get that stability of the foot started first, because the next point of that is your ankle, which that's a mobile joint, but it requires stability. So as it goes up the chain, we need to make sure that that first thing that's touching the ground is stable, okay? So what I'm gonna do there is ask if she can, she's got shoes on. What I'm going to do is see if she can spread her toes apart, okay? I'm going to ask her if she can spread her toes. Tend to wear like business shoes or dress shoes or those things when your feet are kind of like glued along. This might need something you need to practice a little bit. Like I would recommend while you're warming up, take your shoes off. Get those toes opened up. It's just like my hand. The more my hand splays open, the more surface area I have to grab a hold of, the stronger that's going to be. If I'm squatting on line, and as she pushes herself into the ground, okay? So if you're following along with this, you might notice right when you push your big toe to the ground, that flexes the arch and creates the arch of your foot. When that happens, you guys, we're creating stability and we're creating torque at your foot, okay? That's kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge, nice and strong there, all right? So if you're prone, flat feet, this is a good exercise to help with that. You're only as strong as your feet are. If your feet tend to be weak, you have problems with that, especially if you're going out running, you're trying to jump, you're doing these things. This could be a big issue for what we tend to see, okay? So we're gonna start again from the top, okay? Courtney's gonna brace her belly button nice and tight again. She's gonna spread her toes. She's gonna grab the ground, and she's gonna simply sit down and stand on up.
Which is funny because that's actually harder for me.
Go on. They have to squat in a hole to go to the bathroom. They have to squat in order to function throughout their day. we are very privileged to be able to sit in chairs, to be able to have toilets, to be able to have those things, but that also has caused other problems with that, okay? So what we're gonna do to kind of identify, you can probably see Courtney's prone, obviously, to squatting with thousands of repetitions, so you can kind of see her knee angle as it goes on there. But an easy way for you to, maybe not just an easy way, but a way for you that you can diagnose on this, and this is why it's independent for each little person, is I'm going to ask Courtney, and then you might need a partner. This is where coach would come into play on there. But I'm going to ask Courtney just to simply lay down on the ground.
Face down or?
On your back. On her back. Turn.
Sideways?
Yeah. Okay. So from here, all I'm going to do, okay, just kind of as a example here, okay, I'm going to take my hand under the small of her back, okay? From here, I'm going to take one of her knees, and I'm simply going to take on behind the knee, and I'm going to bring it to her chest, okay? I'm going to start off kind of straight ahead. Okay, I'm going to feel just where her hand or her low back starts to push into my hand. Okay, you can do this for yourself. It's a little bit easier with a partner as you're going through there. Any uncomfortable? No? Okay. But once I got about here, Courtney's back started flushing out. So this was kind of about her end range of motion with her knees straight forward. Okay, I'm going to come out. I'm going to go a little bit wider. From there, so right about here is where her low back starts to pitch or push into the ground. So I'm about end range of motion here, okay? I'm gonna do that one more time. I'm gonna come out just a little bit wider. And now from here, now we get out. Now you can see her range of motion with her knee outside of here is about 4 or 5 inches deeper than it was with her knee straight ahead, okay? So for Courtney, her hip doesn't allow her to squat as deep with her knees straight forward, okay? So when she externally rotates and pushes that on her left side, pushes her knee out, it allows her to sit a little bit deeper without any issues of the hip, without any discomfort, okay? Now I do the same thing vice versa. I won't do it again just to kind of show you. But you also might do this. You may have one hip that straight forward, you might have more range of motion. On the other hip, you might have to turn your knee out a little bit. So about 10% of population has an acetabulum, the socket of your hip that doesn't align the symmetrical from one side to the other. So you might have one knee straight forward. You might have the other knee pitched out, and it might look a little cockeyed. But for you, that might elicit the best squat motion on there, where if I push both out and my hips don't move very well, I could be causing impingement here, and I could be doing it okay over here. So that's why going through and having somebody go through some assessments with you can be actually very, very beneficial, because you might have been gone through and somebody might have told you like, well, you're not supposed to squat like that. Well, actually, for your anatomy, you might very well need to squat like that. Not to mention if you have range of motion issues. So say for Courtney, like no matter if we got to like here and it's like, oh, that hurts, right? Like that doesn't feel very good. Okay, that's about parallel, right? Like that's about parallel for her to go through there. You can stand on it. I'll help you.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, chivalry's not dead. So for Courtney, so for example, if like for her flexibility and mobility just allowed her to get here, and all of a sudden it's like, my low back starts to hurt, I start to get some knee issues going on, it wouldn't be very beneficial for her to like squat butt to the floor, right? Like she's going to cause more turmoil, and as we go through training protocols, then hopefully we can eventually get her down there. But initially on that, it's like, well, that's not a full range of motion squat. Well, like for Courtney under that circumstance, that would be her full range of motion, where she'd be getting the same stimulus for somebody else that might have adequate range of motion, okay? But luckily, Courtney does have adequate range of motion, all right?
But I didn't 10 years ago. Like I couldn't sit down this low 10 years ago, so just know. And like if you watch me squat, this toe used to turn all the time. So this is a process. Like it isn't like, oh, I just can or I can't squat, right? Like it is definitely a process of going through this and figuring it out.
So now that we've been able to designate, okay, Courtney's good, outside shoulder width apart, okay, we've worked on grabbing the ground, we've worked on setting the midline and bracing, okay. The next part in there, you guys, is, and we distinguished that she moves better with her knees externally rotating and staying out, okay. Yet again, it's being able to kind of understand, like, for some of you guys, this may be very well, but like for me, for instance, if I squat straight ahead, you know, a lot of you, like I was taught way back in the day, like Courtney can come over and like jump on my back. My femur, everything gets impinged here. I literally can't squat down any further because my femur, everything is impinged. All right, so for me, in order for me to squat down, I have to externally rotate so I can get my femur to actually rotate and pass so I can stay through a better range of motion as I'm through with that. Not to mention, once I get my knee, so if Courtney's squatting,
Straight.
yes, go ahead and squat. Let's take a look at kind of what her knees want to do, all right? Well, we consider this as valgus, okay? So the knees want to rotate and collapse in on there. Now, when we go into that valgus knee position, right, like it's not guaranteed that she's going to cause knee issues. It's not guaranteed those, but the potential of that starts to have, there might be a little more shearing effect on the meniscus, on the inside of the knee, all those kind of things going on. Not to mention, for most of us, why do we squat, right? Why do most women want to squat?
To have a better butt.
Yes, like most women, they want to squat because they want to work the backside. The second you go here or here, this muscle does not work, okay? Your glute's job is to externally rotate your knee, okay? Its job is to push your knees out. So if you're really trying to focus on building a better butt, which that's obviously the biggest thing going around right now is all the butt stuff. Sorry, that was there. If your biggest goal is to try to work on your butt and get ready for bathing suit season and everything else, and you're squatting like this, you're not doing yourself any favors because you're not even accessing the muscle, the job of what the job of the muscle is supposed to do. Okay, so that's why we want to focus on being able to externally rotate and push out. So what we do on that is Courtney's going to get set up. She's grabbing the ground. What I'm going to ask Courtney now to do is screw her feet into the floor, okay? So I want you to think like a screwdriver. We're going to go righty-tighty with it, all right? So she's going to grab the ground with the floor. She's going to screw the feet to the floor, keep belly button nice and tight. She's just going to sit on down, stand on up. Good. Big toe down. Let's go 2 more. Nice. 1 more. Awesome, okay, so what we're doing there, you guys, is yet again, you can try it at home. When you stand there, grab the ground, twist your feet into the floor. Think, screw it in nice and hard. When you do that, what happens?
You get more stable.
What happens to your backside?
Oh, it turns on.
Right, so right when we do that, automatically that engages the backside. So yet again, if you want to work in your booty, screw your feet to the ground, okay? The next thing we're going to do is spread the floor, okay? So I want Courtney to envision that she has 2 towels under her feet, or the same time that she's on a stretchy floor, all right? As she squats down, she's going to screw her to the ground, but she's also going to spread the floor, okay? Go ahead and sit on down. Give me 3 of the best ones. You keep belly nice and tight. Good, spread on out. You can use an external cue. You might have somebody put their hand on the outside. Good, okay? So yet again, we've designated engaging the breathing, bracing. We're talking about splaying the toes, grabbing the ground, screwing the feet to the floor, and now spreading the floor, okay? Now, last thing on this, you guys, is we've talked about stability, but we also want to talk about balance, okay? Your body's job always wants to stay in homeostasis and balance, whether it's on a hormonal level, whether we're talking about an exercise level, okay? So being that Courtney's doing an air squat, okay? So when we're doing a back squat, a front squat, for some of you guys that do overhead squats, that all those are balancing exercises. So your position is going to change based off of the where your weight is being held. Okay, so like for Courtney, she's not holding any weight. So her balance point is her sternum. So when she squats down, I'm not turning face on. So when she squats down, her goal is to keep her sternum right over the center portion of her foot. Okay, so when we're moving, we want to talk about lines of action. So if you can see from the side, from that straight line from her foot, if you see where her sternum is at, it's right over top of the middle part of her foot, and she's going to stand up from that position, okay? Go ahead and do that 2 more times. We're going to do there, dear. Good. 1 more time. Big toe down. Awesome, okay? So for some people, you might notice that like for them, they're a little bit more pitched forward. For some people, they're a little bit more upright as they're going through there, right? Like that's where your own anatomical differences are going to be kind of made up on this, because squatting, jumping, running, dancing is all about balance and stability, okay? Now, the next two, the kind of clarify, all right, so that's the air squat we're looking for, okay? So the first time Courtney's feet were falling in, she had valgus knees, her chest was falling, all these other domino effects of what we see. By simply learning how to brace, spread the floor, grab the ground, and working on pushing out, that automatically opens that up differently for her as far as her movement goes. Does that feel better?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the questions that are always a hot topic, right? Like we went over how deep she should squat. Yet again, that's going to be dependent on each and every person. But you know, like Courtney said, I know for myself, like growing up as a football player, everything else, like squatting here to here was like full range of motion. As I got a little bit more into different realms of training, all of a sudden, like hip crease below the knee was considered full range of training or full range of motion. This takes time, you guys. Our stance on there is we want to make sure that we have flexibility first. Okay, so flexibility is always number one. We want to make sure that we can move that joint through a passive range of motion. Next thing, we want to have mobility. So I can have flexibility, like you might be a yogi, but oftentimes like yoga, they can have all the flexibility in the world, but oftentimes there could be stability issues at the end range. So mobility is having strength at the end range of motion, okay? And then we want to work strength from those aspects, okay? Oftentimes, and then skill would be the last part on there, but oftentimes we want to start off with skill as opposed to kind of refining the movement, right? Like for a lot of people we see is like, oh, I need to work on my squat. Well, it's like, well, what's your foot position looking like? How can you grab the ground? Can you stabilize? Can you do all these kind of things to make sure we're in the right position, okay? But two questions we oftentimes get, okay, is, you know, should I be squatting deep as I go through there, right? Should I always be just sitting down here because I've heard that's bad for my knees, I've heard it's bad for my back? Yet again, how deep are you squatting to go to the bathroom? How deep are you squatting to sit down to your chair at your desk? How deep are you squatting down to pick up your kids, right? Like how deep are you squatting down to potentially pick something up off the ground? Right? Like our stance on there is we want to, like, whether you do it or not, whether you're doing it from a training standpoint isn't necessarily the most important part of this, but if you potentially are going to be exposed to something, we want you to make sure that your body is prepared for that potentially, right? Like, yet again, we live in Colorado. If I don't train myself to potentially have to shovel or do these things and all of a sudden I'm exposed to it, right? Like if all of a sudden I get a flat tire and I never train myself to have to possibly get down and get the tire from under my car and everything else. Yes, these are extreme conditions, but at the same time, they're conditions that what we see. Right, anything to that?
Can I tell a funny story?
Sure.
So when I met Brandon, I didn't squat a lot, but I'm not kidding you guys. He got vegetables out of the bottom of the fridge. He'd be like this, and I'm like, what is this guy doing? But he was like, perfect form, getting his vegetables. So that's my funny story. No, I think the big thing with squatting, you guys, is that you kind of have to know where you are, and don't be afraid to take a step back, right? Like I had a hip thing last year where it hurt to squat a ton, and so I stopped squatting. I backed off. I worked mobility. Like I spent a solid 5 to 10 minutes sitting in the bottom of a squat every day because I knew that of those things, mobility was my biggest piece. And so allowing myself to take a step back, to fix it, to do it right, fix it, to shift the things that needed to shift so that I could actually do it right and then put the strength on top of it, right? So we get so worried about how much can I lift and how much of all of that, and that doesn't matter if you're not doing it with good form and if you're actually causing yourself more damage.
Well, that's a good point, because oftentimes, you guys, you might have a strength imbalance, right? Like, for a lot of us, like, we've seen people literally stub their toe around for a week, and all of a sudden it causes kind of detrimental effects kind of down the road. So you may, because of compensations, because of certain things, may actually have a strength imbalance, right? Like, you're might be actually stronger or overused compared to your right leg on there. So you could have discrepancies going through that. So for like Courtney for a while, double leg squatting wasn't the best idea for her, right? Like despite how much she wanted to just squat, working on single leg action, working on mobility,
and
working on balance,
right? And so, I mean, we talk about this and everything else we've been talking to you guys about is awareness, right? But when you have awareness and connection to your body, you can start to feel those things. So now, because this like hurt for so long, when I squat, my right leg will take most of the work if I don't pay attention to actually like trying to balance it out. So just like we talked about with the emotional side of things and with the food side of things, like become connected to your body and create awareness when you're moving. Just don't like do the things, but actually think about like, how is this moving? How am I feeling? Where am I engaged? Where am I not engaged, right? And so in the beginning, it feels weird, but once you start doing that, then you can catch yourself before you're down that path of like injury and something that you're going to end up having more problems. So really pay attention to what you're doing and how does your body feel.
Well, and ultimately, you guys, yet again, it's what are you doing this for? Right? Like, I think sometimes, especially in the CrossFit space, you know, we get a lot of athletes, well, like the workout of the day says, you know, 150 air squats per time. It's like, well, that's great, but where's your current capacity? What's your body allowing you to do? And the goal wise is to be able to add a little bit every single day, right? Like, it isn't just to like demolish yourself. Like, anyone can do that, right? Like, you can add your ego into all these things and let yourself do that. But the goal wise is we look at it as kind of like a Lego set. Put little itty bitty pieces on there, build your foundation, and then put the immaculate house on top of it. If we're always so concerned about building the house and not building the foundation, I don't care how beautiful your house is, the walls are going to crack, right? So if we can build the foundation and solidify that, for one, you're going to see better results, and for two, it's going to be sustainable, and you're going to be a lot happier, right? Like, we run into that a lot of like, well, I've been doing all these things for a month, but I'm just beat all to hell, right? Like, I don't care who you are, what goals you have, it's going to be adversely, or it's going to be negatively affecting you. Okay, now one little myth I want to kind of go over a little bit, and that would be, can your knees go over your toes, or can they go past your toes? Okay, so I want to just kind of show kind of diagram that I think this kind of helped me understand it a little bit more. So I'm going to let Courtney use the ball here, okay? You can see this. So all I want you to do is just sit on down, decent squat. Go ahead and face that way so they can kind of see your angle. Okay, so as you can see in Courtney's normal squat with her balanced, with her center of mass over the middle part of her foot, her knees are past her toes, okay? Now there's been, you can relax, there's been a lot of different studies, a lot of different research that shows, you know, like yeah, you get more shearing forces on the knee, you get all these kind of things. Weight distribution goes back and forth, okay? It's kind of like a teeter-totter. So when Courtney's knees go forward, it allows her to stay more upright, okay? So in her upright position, it actually takes pressure off of her low back and her hips. Now, the other side of that is, okay, we don't want to put any knee pressure on there, so let's slide your hips back, and let's make sure your shins are more vertical so your knees aren't going past your toes. Well, the second her knees go back horizontal or vertical, all this tension has to go somewhere else. That's where it goes down into the low back and goes into your hips, right? Like, all that tension doesn't disappear. I mean, the part with that is the hips are a little bit larger, are a little bit more braced for those kind of things. But if you're prone to, yet again, mobility issues, stability issues of the hip, low back problems, everything else, and you're overwhelmed and over-worried about like, well, I don't want to put pressure on my knee, so I'm going to make sure I sit super far back in this kind of more of like a hip hinge type of squat, you're actually going to put more detriment onto your low back and hips, okay? So that's why it's not necessarily following the rule of like, well, you never want to do that, is yet again, for your anatomy, for your mobility, for your stability, for your strength, is that actually going to be the best movement for you?
Well, and try it, right? Like, my hips are always a little bit off, and so even just sitting here, like, I don't have any pressure. When I slide back, I'm like, that does not feel good, and like, I don't even think I could stand up from that position. So you have to figure out what actually works for you. And again, be connected and understand it and have a coach that can actually teach you these things. Because I can tell you what, you guys, when I started 15 years ago, like, I didn't teach myself all this stuff. It was actually having a coach and having somebody watch you. Because I think that's the other thing, is often like what we feel like we're doing is totally different than what you're actually doing. Sometimes you're like, oh, that was so bad. And then you watch it, you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And you're like, no, my knees are totally pushing out. Everything's great. And you watch the video and you're like, what the heck actually happened on my squat? So like, it's so important to find a coach and find somebody that can actually teach you this and tell you these little simple things and actually watch you move, right? Because it's totally different, like watching a YouTube video and being like, oh, I got this. And if you can't see yourself moving, you don't know what you're looking for, then that's a huge difference. And that's what we see in so many of our athletes. And like, I'll say this all the time, I'm like, keep your chest up, push your knees out. And like, it's a joking thing that people are like, I'm totally doing that, right? And it's like, Not quite, but like, and so that's the beauty of having a coach and having somebody else that can watch you and see these things, because most of the time we don't actually feel what's truly happening in our body, especially at a time when we're either trying to move heavy weight or moving fast or any of that kind of stuff. So it's super important. Find someone that can help you and teach you and watch you, because that's going to make you better a lot faster.
Well, and I understand you guys, especially if you're doing like a lot of YouTube tutorials or just kind of like going off of whatever. If you're watching somebody who's been squatting, like yet again, I was basing what I was doing and basing this tutorial off of what Courtney did, the first squat that she did. If every client that walked through our door squatted like that, the first squat, like that'd be like rainbows and unicorns like flying from the sky. That just doesn't happen, right? Like it's taken Courtney, like she said, 15 years to work on being able to solidify this just being kind of second nature for her of squatting through this range of motion and keeping these points of performance, right? Like, but if you're basing if you're watching, an Olympic weightlifter squat who's been weightlifting since they were like 8 years old and they have all mobility, all flexibility, they're strong through all range of motions, but you've just started your exercise journey, right? Like your movement pattern is going to be a lot different. Your muscle and motor pattern, all those things are going to be significantly different than like somebody who's there, right? Like yet again, like I've had these arguments with like coaches on there of like, well, no, they should be straight ahead. It's like, well, you're arguing with somebody and you're comparing them to like an Olympic weightlifter who's in the Olympics versus like Joe Schmo, who just came off the street for the first time exercising, who's been playing with his kids for the last 10 years and been working in a factory, right? Like those two that's comparing apples to oranges. So that's why all these things are very important, so you can understand the points of performance, not just sitting down, because yet again, if you're doing a lot of the HIIT workouts, a lot of those kind of things, you guys, there's a lot of repetitions if you're doing that throughout the entire week, right? Like they may add up to like thousands of repetitions of doing these things. And so you may have the best intentions of like, well, I'm getting my exercise in, I'm getting my training in, but if you're doing under like compounding all these movement patterns and you're not getting the proper stimulus and proper engagement of what you're trying to shoot for, you may actually be doing more detriment than actually aiding the things that you're wanting to create as far as your physical attributes and all those the other aspects of health go along with that without properly doing these movements correctly. So I really do hope this helps.
Yep. And you guys, we actually put together a whole squat guide. It's called Save Your Squat. So if you guys want that, it's a downloadable PDF. We'll drop the link. You can go grab that. It's super, super beneficial. Also, if you guys want to do some squats, send us a video. We'll send it back with some feedback. We'd love to actually help you guys feel better in this time of quarantine and make sure that when you're coming out of it, that you haven't done more damage than you're doing good. So I'll drop the link for that. We appreciate you guys. Let us know what questions you have. What other questions you have about movement. This week we're focused on movement. Yeah. Good.
No, I appreciate that. But yeah, like yet again, you guys, as simple as the squat is, like I don't know how long we just took, but like literally that was just to talk about the air squat, right? Like that was diving way far into these things than probably a lot of people probably been exposed to. So yeah, if you want to video your squat, you guys send it to us. We'd love to see it. We'd love to help you guys out and see how we can just help you through this time. So yet again, we appreciate you guys' time. We appreciate you guys hopping on. Hope you all are safe and healthy through this time. And
we've talked about environment. You can see our now empty room that was not empty. So yeah, go make it so you can have a place to work out. All right, guys, let's see you tomorrow.
Later, y'all.